So His Holiness, she's actually saying happy birthday to you on behalf of Tibetans inside and outside of Tibet. This question is related to Buddhism. I have asked this many times, but I've never got a clear answer. Len? Maril. So, but I have not got a clear answer so far. When somebody dies with anxiety, full of anxiety, and it is said that they will be reborn as a ghost. It's not only human beings, but even animals have some anxiety when at the time of death, because during our life, from the point of view of Buddhism, it is said that we have some attachment to oneself, and so we feel that when we die that you are actually going out of existence, and therefore there is discomfort and fear, and therefore all of us are reborn in this life, having passed from the previous life. And so in the past life, when we were about to die, we already went through this experience of fear. But we are not born as ghosts, and so we are born as humans. So when inside Tibet, people self-immolate, they have their motivation is positive. So, because I heard that that is the case, that when people die in fear, but in the case of self-immolators, they have this positive motivation. They die for the Tibetan cause, and therefore I have doubt about this statement. So in the 1940s, even in the Amda region, when the Red Guards actually were coming, many people actually fought and died, fought against the Chinese. And then especially since 1956-57, many people also died. So roughly speaking, until 1980, around 1980s, in Tibet, those who died in fight in the battle or died in prison through torture and hardship in prisons, and also jumping into rivers. There were many people who passed away under these situations. And then in villages, people also starved to death. And so, in around 1980s, many Tibetans who started coming out of Tibet, and we met them. And so, we have some reports about them and from them, and therefore over 1.2 million Tibetans died until around 1980. And then there have been lots of bloodshed in the recent years, and especially in the very recent years, we have now around 140 people who actually self-immolated. It's very sad. So these self-emulators, their basic motivation is to help or the Tibetan cause, and many of them also have thought that they are doing this for Tibetan, for the sake of Buddhism. But with regard to bodhicitta, this altruistic intention, it needs lots of years and training for lots of years. And so it just cannot happen by saying the prayer, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened. May my practices of generosity and so forth become cause for me to become a Buddhist, to help other sentient beings. This prayer alone cannot. It needs lots of training over many years. And then in the 1960s, around 200 monks were arrested by the Chinese, and some of them were actually going to be executed by the Chinese. And yes, and one Tibetan monk and the Lama, who was called who became at one point the Minister of Security Department. So he told me a story that so in the 1950, 54, 55, I have actually been to some of the Amdo regions. And so there was one teacher whom I have met in those years. So he was one of those arrested. And so he was a teacher of Samba. And when he reached the execution place, he requested the Chinese guard to let him make some prayer before being killed. And so his prayer was, may through the blessing, may my spiritual master bless me so that I could take on the suffering of others and give my happiness to others. And then, after having said this prayer from Lama Chepa or Guru Puja, he was shot. And he said, please now shoot me. And so in these kind of cases, perhaps we could say that such a person has had actually the experience of bodhicitta. And so the prayer that he made was that may the negativities and the results, which is suffering of others, ripen upon me. And so for the sake of the Dharma, there are many who have forsaken their life, given up their life. So there have been many cases. Of course, the basic motivation at the causal level is good. It was good. But at the time of death, if there has been a strong anger, for example, then that's not going to be good. So, although originally at the causal, full causal motivational level, it may have been very positive, for example, for Dharma, for the teaching of the Buddha and other sentient beings. And then if that could be sustained even at the time of death, then that would be really positive. So whether some action becomes positive, negative, or remains neutral is dependent on our motivation. And therefore, the actions that they took, whether they are positive or negative, are dependent on So she has written a poetry, a short poetry. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, the jewel when I see this is a praise to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, saying that His Holiness, you are our pride, Tibetan pride. It's a good poetry, but there's what we call an exaggerated poetry. It's an exaggeration. So she came from the South Indian Tibetan settlement of Bailakupi, and His Holiness is saying, I've been there many times, so this is a new generation. Very good. I appreciate your efforts. Chigin level do. Pegi Japan chigin level do. He's saying that he's from Sherab Gatseling. So he's meditating in the mornings, sometimes on impermanence, sometimes on karma, and then also sometimes on the preciousness of this human life. And so when he does these meditations, he feels very inspired. But after the meditation on a daily, when I live my daily life, I feel I face problems. So I request Your Holiness to explain how we could actually generate or cultivate, have real experience of meditation. So I'll explain this later. So what you have said is true. So even in the past, in Indian, for example, the 17 Nalanda masters who were realized and also highly learned, they didn't become learned and realized right from the beginning at the time of death. But of course, there could be some exceptional cases where some of them could have had the experience that very powerful experience, imprints from the past, their past lives. Except in such special cases. Even, for example, I consider this important to remember that Buddha himself, of course, went through the 6-year austerity practice. I don't know if he really didn't take any food at all, but as what we know is that the Buddha actually became so initiated through this austerity practice for 6 years. So in Potala Palace, when I was in Tibet, I used to have a picture of the Buddha, statue of a Buddha in this austerity practice. And so all eyes looked very hollowed, and all the ribs were shown. So I used to feel a little bit fear, but then also feel inspired by the Buddha putting effort. So of course, if we logically speak, the Buddha actually was an embodiment of the 4 Buddha bodies, and he couldn't have become emaciated or so forth and so forth. But then, for the benefit of his followers and others who actually wish to pursue the path to enlightenment, he showed the example that we need really to put effort and be diligent in our practice. Today we have lamas who actually seem to be claiming that they are almost like the Buddha, but they do not have to. They do not have to put effort in their studies and practice. So when I was young, I received teachings from Tata Rinpoche, and especially I received lots of initiations and transmissions. One day, he scolded me. Yeah, saying that even if your realization, in terms of realization, you may be equal to the gods, you should still keep yourself within the human realm. Behave like human beings. And so that really helped me. So I have, although I have the title of the Dalai Lama, I have never disregarded my teachers at all. I've never been disrespectful to them at all. So I've been behaving like a human being. So there are lamas who are actually spoiled. And so just recently in newspapers in Taiwan, there were stories about such people who wear monks' robes and sit on high thrones, but their mind is obsessed with women and money. So these are disgrace to the Dharma. So there were such cases before. So soon we'll have a meeting of high Tibetan lamas. So we'll discuss about these issues, these matters, with a concern for the Dharma in general, and feel some responsibility for the Dharma. So if we don't do that, of course the Buddha Dharma has been there for the last over 2,600 years. But therefore, just because of few people's misbehaving or mischievous people, Buddhism cannot be disregarded. But if we don't need people, we don't need to hear people say that, oh, these Tibetan lamas, that we don't criticizing Tibetan Buddhism. And so such misbehaving lamas cannot help us out of they cannot help. If they misbehave, nobody can save them from going into hell or other lower realms. And so with regard to the Buddha Dharma, you first need to study and then reflect on what you have heard over and over again, and then gain strong conviction in the teaching, and that you need to familiarize your mind with that for over months and years, decades. So of course, when I was as a child, a young child, I didn't have any interest in studying the Buddha Dharma. I really liked to play with people, and when it came for me to resume my studies, I felt as if I was like in a going into darkness. And when I had to go through before my teachers, tutors, I really felt uneasy. And then when I knew that the next days would be a holiday, I felt really excited. So when I reached around 13, 14, 10, 11, 13, 14, then I started taking some interest in studying the Dharma, because I also had to go around the different monasteries. And then around 15 years of age, I really seriously began to pay attention to practicing meditation. And then the times changed. And after coming into exile, in the 60s, I actually reviewed the texts which I had studied before I sat for the exam. And 1967, I received teaching on the Bodhisattva Charya Avatar Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, and also then I actually began to reflect on the mind training texts. And with regard to Buddhism, the view of emptiness, I had interest even before coming into exile. And then after coming into exile, since about around 25 years of age, I really paid more interest in the view of emptiness. And then I had, over the last decades, I could see some change going on within me. And so I'm now 80 years old. So with regard to the view of emptiness, I have a very strong feeling for that. And so the explanations of Nagarjuna and these other great masters, when I could really say, oh yes, this is true. And so the explanation, when I apply them within myself, I could see the obvious, very active attachment and other negative emotions which come within the desire realm, category of desire realm. I could see these reduced a lot, although I do not meditate on, and I do not cultivate the path, mundane path to kind of reduce them. And it really helps to curb anger and fear and so forth. And so to combat the negative emotions, the meditation on emptiness is very helpful. It cannot happen, this cannot happen in a day, within a day, but you need to think over and over about emptiness, so that even in dreams you are thinking, you are able to think about emptiness. And therefore, although we are full of negative emotions now, we can see them reduced and some change going on within us. So although I do not have big and huge experiences, but I have some experience of this. And then I could actually say that this is going to be, that negative emotions can be overcome in time. So thank you for your question. And Gongdang Rinpoche has said, forgetting your food and drinks on a day, you put effort. The enlightenment cannot happen just in a few days' time. Therefore, you need perseverance, like the continuous flow of river. So you cannot be unrealistic. You cannot gain realizations and insight into these ideals easily. So we need to be realistic, even in terms of our livelihood. And then this is the case with Buddhism as well. I pray Your Holiness to live long and may your noble wishes be fulfilled quickly. So my question is on shamatha and vipassana. What kind of paths we should actually go through to develop these shamatha, calm abiding, and what do we need to develop vipassana? So what teachings Buddha gave on shamatha and vipassana, and what are the connection between these two? Even at the time of the Buddha, the non-Buddhist traditions have already a good practice of shamatha. When the Buddha started giving his teaching on the Four Noble Truths, he actually went over the Four Noble Truths 3 times, first saying this is the Noble Truth of suffering and so forth, just showing the nature of these 4 truths. And then during the second repetition, he said suffering must be understood, and the origin must be overcome, the path, cessation must must be attained and path must be cultivated. And then he said, there's not, once you have overcome the suffering and so forth, there's nothing to be overcome and understood and overcome and attained and cultivated. So we are stuck at this experience of shamatha, the tranquil abiding. If you have a real true experience of tranquil abiding, this single-bodied concentration, I mean, you would be able to make a great breakthrough in the path, development and progress along the path to enlightenment. So within the writings of the Tibetan masters of Sakya, Nyingma, Gelug and Kagyu traditions, there are lots of texts written on the cultivation of shamatha, and some of them are actually explained from within the context of tantric practice. In the writings of Je Tsongkhapa, in his Lamrim to Lamrim texts, it's very clearly explained how to develop the shamatha. He actually based his explanations on the Bhavana Grama by Kamalashila, stages of meditation by Kamalashila. And so, with regard to the shamatha and vipassana, there are vipassanas related to the mundane path, which are actually cultivated by the non-Buddhist tradition practitioners. And in Lamrim Chemo, the great stages of the path by the Tsongkhapa, he mentions these things. So it's, with regards to the mundane path, he mentions these. So it seems some non-Buddhist practitioners have some experience of shamatha and vipassana. When I was invited to a Mahakumbha Mela gathering, which happens and which is celebrated every 12 years. So some years ago, I was actually invited to come to the last Mahakumbha Mela festival. And when I got the invitation, I sent a message asking to meet non-Buddhist practitioners who actually live naked in the Himalayas. Not even a loincloth. So there are sadhus living in the Himalayas, totally naked. So I said that I wanted to meet such practitioners. They must have the tomo, inner heat practice. So without which they could possibly not live in the cold climate throughout the years. So if they have the Tummo experience, Tummo meditation experience, it's quite sure that they have quite a good single-bodied concentration as well, samadhi. So of course there are other practitioners and scholars of Hinduism, but these I said specifically I wanted to meet such sadhus from the Himalayas. But in the end, because of the weather, I couldn't go take the flight from the Dharamsala airport. So I said that, jokingly said that Himachal is regarded as the land of Shiva, and perhaps Shiva was not so favorable for my visit to the Mahakumbha Mela festival. So I couldn't go anyway. And so I think there are such practitioners of non-Buddhist traditions, and then there are definitely those Hindu practitioners, non-Buddhist practitioners who practice what is known as vast breathing and other meditations. So if we could meet with such practitioners, real meditators, then we could share our experiences and knowledge. This is something we need to do. And in our monastic institutions of learning, perhaps we could have these kind of meetings on an academic level, and also to share experiences as well. So if we could do this, this would be mutually beneficial. So your question is very good. So you need to study more. I don't have experience of shamatha, tranquil abiding. I have an excuse to make here because I don't have time, I'm too busy.
Next question.
So since the Department of the Minister of Education from the CTA is here, who is the person directly concerned with education, and he would know the practical side of what needs to be shared. So perhaps I have the greater experience in a general sense. But when it comes to doing practical things, I don't have not much experience, because there's a large number of Tibetan students here gathered. So after my teaching, please prepare yourself for your interaction with the students. So this is a prayer for long life of His Holiness. Since you're 16 years of age until now, Your Holiness has been dedicating yourself for the benefit of all beings and Tibetans. I would like to thank you wholeheartedly for all your work. My question is related to Dharma protectors, relying on Dharma protectors. So this is something that we have been doing. It's been a part of our culture. But there have been people who made mistakes of how to rely on the protectors. There are today lots of misunderstandings. When did this propitiation of protectors, Dharma protectors, start in Tibet? How should we recognize Dharma protectors? And having recognized them, how do we identify these Dharma protectors, and how do we propitiate them? So in Tibet, before Buddhism spreads there, we already have our indigenous religion of Burman tradition. So it's not only Tibet, but even in different parts of the world, there is this practice of shamanism everywhere in Africa and so forth. So when people face some problems, difficulties, and they felt that they are powerless, it's beyond their capacity to deal with these problems, and then they began to, we began to think that there is some higher power called God, and we began to kind of rely on them, keeping our hope, putting our hope on them. And so the Red Indians of America also have this kind of shamanism practice, and in Africa also this exists, and also in Asia, these practices there. So worshipping nature and different spirits and gods and so forth was there even before Buddhism spread to Tibet. So, but regarding Buddhism, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the objects of refuge for those who aspire to liberation. This is what Master Chandrakirti said. So there is only three jewels to whom we take refuge. There's no fourth refuge. So the Buddha is the teacher, and then the Dharma is the actual refuge, and then the Sangha, the monastic community, or the Sangha, is our assistance. And so the Buddha is not the actual so the actual refuge that we should actually look for is rely on is the Dharma jewel, and then the Buddha is the teacher of the Dharma, and the Sangha are those who assist us. So the Dharma jewel, or the refuge of Dharma, the Dharma refuge is comprise the true path and true cessation, and that we can develop within ourselves. So perhaps I'm being too much. So when Tantra spreads across Tibet, then since there are many different wrathful deities bearing fangs and so forth, and then maybe the local deities' spirits also began to kind of assume those demeanors. In the Pali tradition, there are no such things, and so it all began with tantric practice, which needed to be practiced, secretly and not kind of openly. But in Tibet, the practice of tantra became something which we do openly, and then we also have the different entourage of the main deities and so forth. The 8 different tekpas, or mundane deities, and so who are not actually part of the refuge, objects of refuge. And so they may, because we paid so much attention to the deities, and then these local mundane deities also began to find their way in, kind of attempted to find their way in to become objects of refuge. So many years ago, one Japanese man came to see me after having gone on pilgrimage or after having visited to Tibet, and he was in Gyantse and saw the Gyantse Belgochardin, that's the great stupa, the famous stupa, and in some of these shrines of that stupa, he said that the rooms were dark and there were these deities, very wrathful deities bearing their fangs. And having seen these in the daytime, he couldn't actually sleep that night at all, because all these wrathful, fierce-looking deities just keep coming to his mind. And so he told me that Buddhism is about the emphasizes the love and compassion. Why does Buddhism have all these wrathful, fierce-looking deities? How come we have these? And so, with regard to these meditational deities, the wrathful and peaceful Buddha deities, they have their own significance and symbolism. And Tantra is a practice whereby you take the negative emotions into the path, such as anger, attachment, are taken into path. In the Dzogchen tradition, there is a very beautiful expression. So first, there is the practice related to the Four Noble Truths. So which is a path directly combating the negative emotions and the suffering and its origin. Of course, Tantra actually is about taking the negative emotions of attachment and anger into path, but we have to actually go into it in a gradual manner. And so there are the 3 basic jhanas or vehicles, Shravaka, Patyeka, and Bodhisattva jhana, and then there are the 3 lower Tantra sets. And Kriya Upper Yoga Tantras, and then there are the highest Yoga Tantra, which come under these three categories: Maha Yoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga. So when it comes to tantric practice, it is referred to as the vehicle where you master the gain mastery over with your skillful means. And so when you are able to actually understand the real significance and symbolism of the deities and the practices, then of course you can understand the practice of the appearance, the fierceful and peaceful looking deities. And then there are what is known as 15 different directional guardians. Within there are those who are mundane and who are transcendental. And within the mundane, there are those negative and positive ones. And therefore, we need to, of course, because we lack any understanding and knowledge of the different tantric practices, how we should understand the tantric practice, because we have not done study of them. And then it seems that we have emphasized the tantric practice quite openly, and therefore it seems that local deities, the mundane spirits even, seem to be trying to get this place in the transcendental group. So when we say take the refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, those deities who have reached the path of seeing, and then gone beyond that, they are actually our objects of refuge. And therefore, those who have not reached that level, we cannot take refuge in them. As it is said in the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, themselves bound in samsara, how can they actually give refuge to others? And therefore we, because of lack of our knowledge and practice, and we are not aware of whom we should take refuge in and whom not to. And therefore we kind of get mixed up. So, of course, it's very difficult for us as individuals to actually make our judgments on which deities are transcendental, which deities or spirits are not transcendental. But a Lama, some teacher who has some real wisdom and realization through which they could actually make this kind of judgment. And unless we rely on such Lama, we as ordinary people will not be able to make this kind of judgment. And then there are, of course, the practice of divination, for which we need to do the qualified practices, and then use certain materials and substances to check the authenticity of these spirits, whether they are worthy of object of refuge or not. So, because these spirits are formless, it's very difficult. So perhaps you are asking about Gyögyel or Shugden. I also did propitiate Shugden, but when I thought about it more seriously, Shugden actually came evolved at the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, and he was the person most familiar with Shugden. So he says he was born from distorted prayers, and his function, what he does, is to harm the Dharma and sentient beings. and his perfidious spirit. So this is the verse. These are the lines which the fifth Dalai Lama himself wrote in a prayer. In his biography also, he mentions about this Shugden Lapit, but in his sixth visionary teachings and practice cycle of teachings, he actually included these lines which I quoted. And so in the past I did propitiate, but later, after knowing the truth about the Shugden, then I stopped. And then I asked people also, advised people to stop. So if we are not careful, we also almost tend to be like those who follow theistic religions by saying that I take refuge. You actually tend to think that the Buddha is like a creator God. That's wrong. And so I had a very good Christian friend who Christianity has Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And when my friend made his prayer, when he was praying, and he actually, his eyes welled up with tears. And Bishop Tutu, whom you saw recently, so he's a really genuine Christian practitioner, and he's a very honest and truthful man. So such a person actually came from the Christian tradition. So they rely on a theistic creator God. But we as Buddhists, we don't understand that the Dharma has to be actually developed within ourselves. We think as if the Dharma comes from the Buddha like a blessing, a grace. This is totally against the Buddha Dharma. Therefore, the Buddha has actually said, you are your own master. So because of the lack of knowledge, we do this, we make these mistakes. So I jokingly say, when I visit monasteries and go on pilgrimage, we have the Buddha statue in the center of our prayer halls, shrines, and then there is we would offer butter lamb, which would sometimes give lots of smoke. But in another part of the monastery temple, we have something called Guankang, a protector shrine. And there we actually make offering of alcohol, and even the Guankang smell of alcohol. So I've heard that in Lhasa, that people actually go to this kind of shrine and make offering of alcohol, and then the people who live in the monastery who actually offer these prayers for the devotees, and actually at the end of the day they drink this. So of course, if they actually sold the alcohol or give the alcohol to other people, it would be good, so that they don't get drunk themselves. Good morning, His Holiness. When we differentiate between Buddhism and Buddhist culture, what is the basis of your distinction between these two?
Buddhism and Buddhist culture.
So my thinking is, Buddhism is a religion which is related to an individual, but Buddhist culture is related to a society. As I said yesterday, so some Muslims from Lhasa, Tibetan Muslims, of course, religion-wise, they are not Buddhist, but because they were born within the Buddhist cultural kind of environment, they have more compassion. They're more compassionate, and they actually avoid resist killing. So when it comes to Buddhism, it's one's individual business. But Buddhist culture is related to the society. And so even in terms of the world at large, we could actually make contribution through Buddhist culture. So maybe I'll say this later. So I already explained to you, Buddhist culture is culture of peace, non-violence. So this is actually taught, I talk about this everywhere. And then the peace and non-violence actually are rooted in compassion. Therefore, we have this culture of compassion, which is seeped into the Tibetan blood. So we also say that we are the people of Chendrasik, the deity of compassion. But I don't know if it was the case right in the beginning when the Tibetan civilization began, but after Buddhism spread, we began to become more compassionate. And many Westerners also say admire Tibetans for this compassionate nature. In Chicago, there is a very rich American family, and one of them actually was part of the organization which actually started taking Tibetans to America for rehabilitation. So he said to me that it's not just to help Tibetans come to India, but my hope to come to America, but his wish is that this compassionate culture of Tibetan could actually be imitated by the American society as well. And so this family, Pritzika, or something like that, and then there were cases that Tibetans were considered very honest people. And so people had such an honor for Tibetans, or regard for Tibetans. But then when new generation or people from Tibet started coming and living in India, then Indians even started saying that they began to feel that Tibetans were not so honest now. So this culture of compassion, being honest and truthful, and which all are rooted in our paying attention to compassion, is very precious. With the prayer of long life for His Holiness. In this world, there are people who make their living by killing other animals, but they seem to be living very happily. But there are other people who always wish all sentient beings to be happy and so forth, but they seem to be living a very miserable life. So why is this difference? So there is your question is like picking up one grain of wheat and saying that all grains of wheat are like this or must be like this. So if you look closely, if you really look closely, you'll see that those who are more compassionate, altruistic, are happier. Those people who live, as you said, their life killing other animals are less happy. So one Japanese told me that Japanese are very fond of, they have no hesitation in fishing and eating fish. And so usually I don't actually talk about this because this is their way. This has been their way of life. So in Tibet, Drukpa Kunlek have told that the in people living around the Yamdrok Lake, Drukpa Kunlek had said, "Don't fish, don't kill fish." And then the people didn't listen. And then there is the story that Drukpa Kunlek actually wrote to the Nagas living in this lake not to send the fish out. And so the villagers around, the people living around that lake, didn't see any fish coming to the shores of the lake. So they were living on fish. And they didn't do any farming or didn't had any means of living. And then they were desperate. They became really desperate and went to Drukpa Kunlek, this Tibetan yogi. So he was told that either you release the fish or we would die of starvation. And then Drukpa Kunlek said, if that is the case, if you have no other means of living, then that's an exception. And so he was said to have released the curse. So when our Tibetan settlements began in Bailakuppe, they started also a poultry farm. And the people who actually helped also said that fishery could be quite profitable, and also pig farm was going to be profitable. And so we didn't start the piggery or pig farm and fishery, but poultry farm was started. And then at one point, when I visited Bailakuppe, I told people there that you have this poultry here in the settlement, and the people, concerned people, told me that they have the poultry just for eggs and not for chicken. Then I said that these hens actually give eggs up to certain age, and after that they can't give eggs. And what do you do with the hens? And so there was no response. And so I told them that it's really necessary to have the poultry farm for your livelihood. I mean, I have nothing to say, but if that is not the case, then I would request you to stop this poultry farm, close things down. And so they stopped the poultry farm. So right from the beginning, we were aware that it's not good to make a living by harming other life. So these days there are lots of chickens on the way from on the sides of the road from Dharamsala to Pathankot and Jammu. So in the past these didn't used to be there. But today these have increased. This has increased in the name of progress. So this is really unfortunate. And so there's no way we could actually save these lives by buying them, because we don't have space. Where would we leave them? Keep them. So at one point we started actually saving lives of sheep and goat, and we had somebody looking after. And one day the shepherd actually lost one sheep, and then one of the Tibetan ministers, Gwindeling, questioned, how did you lose it? Has it actually lost into your stomach or what? Go into your stomach or what, he said. And so I'll talk about this later. We need to do something about it, put effort in it. So of course, you may see people who are butchers and becoming very rich and got lots of money, and then they live a very luxurious life, and it would seem that they live a very good life, whereas people who live contented life have less facilities, and they have they suffer more of diseases and so forth. Of course, there are cases, but if you look at the percentage, then that's not the case. So it's 10 o'clock now. I'll take one more question. Give me a very tough question. So I greet you on your 80th birthday. As students, I find it very important to have a very stable mind. As students, we don't have the time to meditate and cultivate shamatha and vipassana. Without doing this kind of meditation, how do we develop concentration? I ask your advice. It's not only Tibetans. Even in the West, there's lots of this. Many people ask this question. They say that the students physically in their classroom, but their mind wanders elsewhere, and so they have this problem even in the West. And to be able to focus your mind on a single object. Today in America, there is training of mindfulness, meditation. There's increasing number of people taking interest in this meditation. They are not thinking about past, future lives, or the rebirth, future rebirth, or anything like that, nor a religious matter. One problem with the Westerners is that they are not able to make a differentiation. They are not able to differentiate between the conceptual mind and the perception, direct perception. So they think that the experience is also only with sensorial. So they're more focused on they think the sensorial experience is everything, and don't pay much attention to the fact that there is something called mind, which we can use apart from using the senses. So even scientists today pay some attention to making this differentiation. So it's actually easy if you pay some attention. It's very easy to make distinction between the conceptual and the sensorial experiences. And today, there's in America, there's increasing interest in the meditation, mindfulness meditation, from the scientists, on the part of scientists, and they also actually train students in this kind of meditation. So mind is not only the sensorial experiences, but we're leaving these aside. If we could train our minds to pay more attention so that we become more aware of the mind, the sixth faculty itself, then it could help in developing concentration. We don't have to talk about shamatha meditation as such. So, being able to stay totally focused without any distraction or impediments of the laxity, mental laxity, and mental excitation. I mean, this needs a lot of effort. And so, one of my American friends has been meditating for about 40 years now. So this person is able to stay focused, single-pointedly focused for 3-4 hours, and because of this concentration, he could actually have some he begins to have some experience of the dissolution of elements within his being. And then another American friend of mine has, and his benefactor, a German wealthy man, have started a meditation center in Thailand. They're not actually talking about religion as such, but they do the meditation on the single-pointed concentration, and they have said that there are people who could stay focused, for 2 hours or so. So, of course, in our society, in our community, we have these great monastic institutions where people do lots of study, but they have not been emphasizing the single-pointed concentration practice. So I have suggested these monasteries to have the centers of meditation as well as part of the monasteries, and these are not just for the mundane level of single-pointed concentration, shamatha and vipassana, but to focus more on the tantric, the 2 phases of Tantra, highest yoga Tantra, generation and completion stage practice. And then I know one Jewish person who lives in Mumbai. So he went to somebody and asked, I received a letter from him saying that please introduce me some Tibetan meditators whom I can actually approach. And I told, when the letter reached my office, my secretaries brought it to me and asked me how should they reply. And I said, in your reply, write that and say that of course there is such things exist, but such people are yet to born. And so in Jiangxi monastery, there seems to have been So out of desperation, I had to say that that person was not yet born. So it's been now 40 years or so since this letter. I replied to him, but if this person were to ask the same question now, what would I have to reply? So now the Minister of Education of the Tibetan Central Administration is a really dedicated person, and he will speak from his own experience. It would be good for him to give a talk here. With due respect to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with my 3 daughters, without taking much time, I'd like to speak on a few points. So the class 12 board examination results came out a few days ago. The result has been really good. 91.8% of the students who appeared in the examination have passed, but this is not like the last year. So we hope the result will be better in the coming years. Students who have secured 75% of marks and above, there have been 147 or something. 443 have secured or 75% and over. And then those who have secured 90 and above. This year we have 16, last year only 10. So, and one of them actually secured 95. And so he would receive the honorary scholarship of 100,000 rupees from the Sikyong's office. Or he or she. So, to the teachers, and so the Department of Education has been researching how we could improve our standard of education in the schools. And so we came up with 2 points to work on. So we have said that we need to work more seriously to educate our students in class 1 through to class 5, and then also to give raise the standard of education and knowledge of the teachers as well. So after class 5, we emphasize teaching Tibetan, since this is the case in the schools. Although we have textbooks, but there is lack of in the schools. There's lack of story books that students could read, and also there's shortage of libraries also in the schools. So what actually is the reason for these is we have known that Tibetans have very little enthusiasm for reading books, and so the parents, beside the schools, the parents do not have the interest in reading books, storybooks, for example. So the parents should learn to read stories to their children after school hours. So for that, we think that the teachers of the schools also should support the parents in this venture. So we have come up with a project for publishing storybooks for children through this series of publications called Sunta books, Seed storybooks, and which could actually fit different age range of age groups of children. So we are trying to bring out, we hope to bring out 90 different storybooks for children by July this year. So the 200, over 200 storybooks that we have, we would distribute to different schools, and so that the teachers actually could use them to assist the children, the students, to read these storybooks. So these books are not meant to be kept locked up in the libraries. So if we could actually initiate the children, motivate the parents and the teachers to help children to read storybooks, then we would have a whole people who would have the enthusiasm to read storybooks more and more. So the teachers have big responsibility over the students. Where the students lead, where in the future, go in the future, is also dependent on the teachers. Of course, teachers have worked very hard so far. And so the teachers also should not be contented with the knowledge that they already have, but they should also improve, and so that they are more apt to help their students better. So of course there are difficulties. Despite difficulties, there are people in the Western countries doing their best to help motivate their children in learning our language and culture. And so, of course, inside Tibet, there's lots of restrictions on learning our own language, our culture, and religion, and so forth. But there seems to be a bit drawback from our side as well, where we lack the motivation to learn our own language. So it's a big responsibility on the teachers as well as students to pay more serious attention to the education and preserving our own language and culture. So both administration, at the administrative level as well as teachers level, there is a complaint that the parents take very little initiative to help and support the education of their children as well. And therefore, we are going to have seminars and meetings where we would be able to actually make the parents aware of the means to help their children in their education. And so right from the beginning, when we came into exile in 1959, His Holiness the Dalai Lama had this far-sighted vision for educating the Tibetan children in the modern subjects, and the setting up schools for our children was a priority. I've always been quite concerned about the situation of Tibetans inside and outside, especially in India and abroad, how we are doing with preservation of our language, culture, and so forth. So on this occasion, auspicious occasion, I feel I'm fortunate to have been offered this opportunity by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to speak a few things. And so it's very important that Your Holiness live a long life for us. Thank you. Which fiction books? No, just storybooks, maybe translations and written. The minister actually went on the rehabilitation project to America, and then feeling the need to come back to serve the Tibetan community in India, he actually returned to work in the Tibetan administration. So, thank you. So, for the introduction to Buddhism, I wish to start by saying that why are we gathered here today? So at the immediate level, we are gathered here for this introduction to Buddhism and other things. What is the ultimate goal? It is for happiness. It is happiness. So this is what I feel. So in this world, what is the purpose of our life as humans? I always say that it is the purpose of our life is happiness. So even animals, if they suffer too much, they also die and age very quickly and die. So if we have a happy life, then we feel we'll have good physical health because of the mental joy and health. And then family is also happy and healthy. And then the society, the community also is going to be happy and healthy. And so happiness actually results also in physical health, good physical health. And so there's very close link between happiness and our health. So if we live, if we suffer too much, then the body also degenerates very quickly. And so, of course, if we don't lose hope, then we will be able to confront any hardship and problems. If you lose hope, then you feel demoralized. It also shortens your life. And in worst case scenario, you would commit suicide. So in India also, this suicide is increasing. In Japan also, there are many cases of suicide. So because of being unhappy, people actually shorten their life through suicide. So the very fact that we live is based on our hope. Of course, we always will keep our hope for something good and not bad. And therefore, life itself is dependent on hope for our survival. So I think that it is the happiness that keeps us alive. And so I always say that whether people are believers or not, or whether they are atheists, even, everyone wants happiness and not suffering. So as I said earlier, happiness with regard to joy or pleasure, there is a pleasure that we draw based on our sensorial experiences of seeing something good, hearing some beautiful music, or tasting something good, or smelling something good, and then also touch or tactile sensation, which includes sexual experiences. And so there is one level of pleasure which is based on sensorial experience, but mainly the happiness that we talk about is mental. In the West, people usually take happiness or pleasure as something which is just sensorial. There's no distinction between conceptual, non-conceptual mind. Actually, the religious practitioners actually practice and have faith, compassion, and so forth, which have to do with mind and not sensory faculty. But when people think about happiness, they think in terms of sensorial experiences of beautiful visual things and interesting music and sex and so forth. And so these are considered true happiness or pleasure. When things go wrong in regard to these, then people become disturbed, mentally disturbed and agitated. And so there is a pleasure and pain based on sensorial experience, and then mainly there is pain and pleasure based on our mind. Which is more important, significant, is of course the later. The reason is, for example, even if you may have physically a great problem, like a very intense sickness, but because of your way of thinking, if you are able to maintain calmness and relax, the physical pain will not be unbearable to you. So if you have happiness in mind, then this could overwhelm the physical pain. This is clear. But if your mind is agitated, disturbed, despite the excellent conditions and facilities, then you will not have happiness. A person who is full of worries, even if the person may be very rich with all the facilities around, he or she will not be happy And then they would resort to alcohol and drugs. So in America and these advanced nations, we have this problem with drugs, drug abuse. This is because there are people who buy these, and without the buyers, there won't be suppliers. And therefore, there are people who actually depend on these drugs for happiness, to try to overcome their suffering. So Tibetans, when they first arrived in Switzerland, there were people who said, "Oh, we talk about, in our tradition, we talk about Sukhavat, the land of bliss. Could this be land of bliss?" They said. But as they lived in Switzerland, longer and longer years passed by, then they actually found that that is not the land of bliss. And then there were people who returned to India. And so there are people who say that the West is where we could make money, but to live your life happily, I mean, India is the place for us. So mental happiness and joy cannot be brought by money, nor manufactured in industries and factories, nor the medicine can give. The agitations, disturbance in our mind is because of anger, jealousy, and so forth. And therefore, we need to develop the antidote from within to overcome these problems that are within our mind. And so even the materially advanced nations, countries, there are people who have lots of mental problems. So the more material development they have made, the people also increase in their greed, and therefore people deceive others and tell lies and become dishonest. And so we need to explain and make distinction between the sensorial experiences and mental experience. And therefore, psychology is very crucial. So in the last 10 years or so in America, there have been programs for meditation on compassion. Not talking about the next life or religious practice, but just to help in this life. People have done some research experiment on in the last 10 years. So in these programs that are run, these programs are run for 3 weeks or so. And first, the participants are explained that they are actually made aware of what compassion means and the techniques to develop the compassion and so forth. And then the participants do meditation for 3 months. And so before the 3-week program starts, the participants, the people actually checked the blood pressure of the participants and stress level, the cortisol level, and so there are other tests also. And then the participants do the 3-week meditation on compassion, and at the end of the program, there again their blood pressure, stress level, and cortisol level are tested. And so this, because of the 3-week program meditation, it has actually helped the participants to have less fear, and they become more jovial, and therefore their interaction with their colleagues and peers, students and so forth, also become better. So this is actually what the scientists find through their own experiment, and not just out of some kind of a blind faith. So some scientists even say that if we remain constantly fearful and anxious, then it actually weakens our immune system. Whereas if you are relaxed, and this helps to maintain your immune system, and even can strengthen the immune system. So some renowned scientists today say that mindfulness meditation, people who have training in mindfulness meditation, when they actually do meditation, the brain also, they see some difference in their brain, working of their brains, and so they talk about neural plasticity, which talks about actually changes, physical changes going into neurons, and and so because of the training itself, mindfulness training on mindfulness and meditation, compassion, so forth, it is said that it actually has impact on the brain. And so gradually now some scientists are saying that there is some agent, something which actually can influence the brain cells, whether they call it consciousness or not. So today, they say that there is something which can actually impact the brain. So material development and progress alone cannot make us feel contented. So this is, of course, it's true. As we say, if we have 100 rupees, we want 1,000. If we have 1,000, we want 10,000, and so forth. So greed never stops. So the more you have, the more you want. And so there's no end to greed. So having discussed with many scholars and experts, we all know that the modern education is actually focused on material development alone. But I have discussions with many scientists and other experts and educationists, educators and so forth. And we all agree that the modern education actually is not adequate. Something is lacking there. So the inner value, like compassion, love, patience, or tolerance, forgiveness. So without having to talk about these things by touching religion, without touching religion, but for a happy individual, happy family, happy society and communities, I mean, we could actually introduce these values in, because the scientists are able to find the positive, constructive effect of training of mind and in compassion and so forth. And then by using these experiments, and they actually introduce meditation in some schools as well. But recently in Canada, the British Columbia province actually have formalized the education of warm-heartedness, these inner values in all the schools and higher institutions. So we have discussed about this before, And so the British Columbia has actually done this, introduce, on a provincial level, this introduction of inner values, warm-heartedness in schools. Montreal, Quebec. So I was invited to Montreal in Canada, and it was a meeting of the professors of universities, educators, in fact, and in their schools they have some education of religion from the Christianity. And so there, of course, this existed before, but they have kind of left that aside, and were not really serious about teaching Christianity in the schools. But they said that it's important for them to introduce the secular ethics in their schools and universities. So I don't know what actually has they have done after the meeting. So the modern education system is not able to actually give or fulfill the complete need of human beings. So people who have actually been through this kind of system of education are introduced to materialistic way of life, and therefore they live that way. So they're under this materialistic culture, they'll have materialistic culture, life. So can this alleviate all problems? Of course, maybe external problems we can solve, but not the internal ones. And therefore, the importance of compassion and love, to introduce it, is very important now. So in academics environment, if we have to give the education on the compassion and so forth from a religious point of view, as a religious subject, it's going to be problematic. So, for example, India is a nation which has lots of different religious sects, and therefore you cannot actually give education based on some religion. If we actually base the education of religious principles based on Hinduism, the Jainism and Muslims and Buddhists will not be able to accept them. And therefore, the Indian constitution itself is, says secularism, that India is a secular state. So what we need is an education program which can actually cover all 7 billion people. So for that, these inner values are beneficial for our good health and also our society, and then ultimately the whole of humanity. And so this is a hope, one thing that we can actually hope for. So as I said yesterday, each and every one of us has the responsibility to think about humanity as a whole, the entire humanity, and therefore in the education system we need to introduce the importance of compassion, warm heart, not saying, oh, this is so because Buddha said so or the God said so and so forth, but biologically we have actually survived because of our parents' love and care, affection, every human being, who actually has experienced, immense, greater amount of love and care from parents right in the beginning of our life, have less anxiety as we grow up, whereas those who have less received more of fear and anxiety and so forth, less of compassion, affection from parents and so forth. As they grow up, they also live in fear and so forth. So we as human beings were raised by our parents with affection. You students, those of you who have been brought up with greater affection and care from your parents, are more compassionate, perhaps, and less. You have less anxiety and fear. And so the scientists have done some experiment with monkeys, where the monkey is left alone without any company, and on the other hand, a monkey which lives with other monkeys and their parents or mom. And the first monkey are found to be less happy, and they're fighting more, whereas the second type of monkey are more jovial and playful with other monkeys. And then people have also experimented on the rats, which have injuries. Two rats, injured rats. One is kept with company, and other rats and other left alone. So the one who has a company, because the other rat actually licked the injury of this one, and because of this receiving love and affection from other rats, they found that the recovery is faster, unlike the other one, which is left alone. And therefore, the scientists and medical scientists especially have found that love and affection is very beneficial in our life. Another very important point is, what is the basic nature of human beings? Some people say that, people are really negative, they are so abusive and so forth. So as I said earlier, you pick up one grain and said, all grains are like this. So this is like that. So of course they are not to be blamed, because whenever we listen to the news on the radio and so forth, we always hear about such and such people being killed here and there and so forth. All kinds of bad news we hear. I've heard this many times, that people say that basic nature of human beings is negative, because we abuse others, we bully others. In Kanpur or somewhere, this question actually is raised all the time to me. One Indian raised this question to me. Think about this. In Kanpur city, there are so many people. So if everyone in the city lived in anger and fighting each other, then of course there won't be an increase in the number of population in this city. Because of anger and these negative emotions, people would kill each other, and therefore the number may not increase. But there are people who have actually been raised with care, affection from parents. And I asked him to compare this with others who actually kill each other. So if the number of people in the latter category, the second category, killing each other is more, then we need no worry about the increase in population. But I said that since this is not the case, that there's increase in the population because people actually have affection, love, and compassion with each other. So our news channels always kind of give us the impression that people are bad, with all these bad news around the world, from around the world. So students, millions of students are getting education, and also there are millions of parents take care of their children with love and affection. And then there are people who do business as well. And so the majority of the people, we can say that, like being treated well, with affection. So there is we have laws where if somebody kills another person or commits suicide, some crime, they are punished. This is because the basic nature of human beings is not negative. When somebody does something negative, we sometimes get shocked as well. And so I've seen some cartoons where, which is in relation to an experiment done with very young infants, about 6 months or so. So when the cartoons are shown where some children are helping others, these infants actually, to whom this is shown, become very happy and they laugh. Whereas if the cartoons actually show someone obstructing someone else, these are animations actually with blocks from different shapes helping other blocks, and whereas when the children are shown some blocks moving uphill and have difficulty actually climbing, and then when another block comes and pushes it and gives a push from behind, and the children actually like them. Whereas if the blocks are actually one block is obstructing the other one, another one from climbing the hill, and these infants actually show negative reaction. And so if you have love and compassion, you have less fear and anxiety. If you have love and compassion, you feel closer to others. If you actually live alone, and you would always be suspicious about others. What would that person do to me? And so forth. I have a story to tell. There is a mother and a child. The mother actually requested some person to do some prayers and rituals in her house. So this mother actually invited the person, the priest, to her house, but from one corner of her mind, she actually suspected if this priest would steal something, and asked her child to watch the priest. And the child sat near the priest in his house, but he was not patient. He was impatient to stay there for longer. So he shouted from his house, saying, "Mom, this priest is not a thief." So here in this story, the mother actually has invited the priest to do some puja, and therefore she would offer tea and food and so forth. But deep down, she didn't trust this person, and so if you don't trust somebody, you will not be happy with that person. So how could we live under such atmosphere? So if the members of a family are happy, can actually trust each other, they're going to be happy. Everyone will be happy. And even if they may be poor, and if they have even guests who visit them would be very happy. Whereas, on the other hand, if you have a very rich family with big houses and so forth, but if the family members are actually suspicious of others, jealous of others and one another, then the atmosphere in that house would be cold. If a visitor goes there, this is what they feel. So, if in human society, if you have love and compassion, then you can actually have trust. As social animals, we need friends, but friendship is based on trust, and trust is based on love and compassion. Do you agree? I'm not talking about past and future lives. So the existing modern education system is not adequate for us, and therefore we need to add the introduction and teaching on compassion, but not touching any religion. Therefore, we have to introduce it on a secular basis. And so, amongst the religious 7 billion people, there are over 1 billion people who have no religion, who are non-believers. And then those who are said to be believers actually misuse religion. And therefore, from beginning with the kindergarten level up to university, higher education level, if we could introduce this love and compassion as part of our curriculum, then this century we could have some hope of this century becoming a peaceful century. And therefore, this is not impossible. So therefore, to be aware of psychology is very important. So I meet these scientists, and so I tell them that we need to actually teach people, and by making distinction between the conceptual thought and conceptual mind and the sensory experiences. So Paul Ekman, a emotional scientist, has actually made some interactive program, computer program, where if you press a button, like jealousy, it would show what are the causes of jealousy, what is the shortcoming of jealousy or faults of jealousy. And so if you press the button of the benefits of what is the effect of jealousy, it would show on the screen. So he's making this kind of program, interactive program. So in October, I'll have a meeting with him. So as it is given in the study of mind or psychology in our text, So we have 5 ever-present mental events or factors and 5 determining mental factors, object-determining mental factors. And then there are 11 virtuous mental factors. And then also the 6 root afflictive emotions and 20 secondary afflictive emotions. And so I usually talk about learning, having the map of emotion. So if you want to go from here to Kangra and Dili, we need to know the route. We need to have the route map. And then, so that we could actually say, from here we reach there, from there to there, and so forth. And so, with regard to mental map of emotion, if you ask a child, do you like your mother when she actually gives you a very harsh, negative face, or shows a very positive face? Of course, the child will say the positive one. And even the animals are able to detect such things. They also like if we treat them well, and dislike if we mistreat them. So amongst you, the students, if you live with others more happily, share your gifts with others, and have warm feeling with each other, you would be happier. And so, if you actually remain more jealous about others and competitive with others, and having this competitive feeling with others, I mean, you would not be happy. And so, if you first have the complete map of mind, then you will know how to actually work with your mind. Otherwise, you might think, when you talk about compassion, you might think it's some kind of an entity out there, and when you talk about anger, it's some kind of entity out there, without seeing the connection as well. So if we know the map of mind and emotion, we would be able to actually deal with anger by knowing what actually provokes anger, gives rise to anger within us, what other causes it is some kind of unhappy feeling or frustration. And then you'll know what needs to be done to actually fight this. So by knowing psychology, we are not talking about making people religious as such, but bringing greater happiness in mind, not just physical level. And so if you can do that, then there's more peace. So this is on a secular basis, purely secular basis, and not religious. In the West, the term secular has the connotation of distance from religion or negative feeling towards religion. Sometimes people even equate it with atheism, so being against, going against God and so forth. But in India, it has a different connotation, where this term is used in Indian constitution itself, which actually has the connotation of respecting all religious traditions. Not only that, but even respecting non-believers. This is great, something great of India, a greatness of India. So, former Deputy Prime Minister, I think, of India, Advani, told me once that there used to be the Charvakas, who were like hedonists in India in those ancient times. And these people were actually criticized by other philosophical and religious schools. But those who are actually practitioners of this Lao, Rishi laws, sage. And so, but the practitioner or the people who hold that view are referred to as rishis or sage. And so this shows respect to even non-believers. But when it came to their philosophical ideas, there were lots of arguments back and forth. So even atheists are respected, or non-believers are respected in India. So because of such culture in India, respecting people of other religions as well as non-believers, and therefore people of different religious schools have been able to live in harmony in India for over 3,000 years or so. And so the basic human nature is love and compassion. If you constantly remain angry and fearful, then it actually depletes your immune system. And so if you want a happy society, you need inner peace. And the root of inner peace is love and compassion. So this is what we are working on, and in collaboration with American scientists and educators and so forth. And so in Europe also people are taking more interest in this kind of project, and also in Japan. Now they're beginning to take interest in this kind of introduction of secular ethics. So we as Tibetans, we don't need to talk about propagating Buddhism, or nor do we have to say Buddhism is the best religion, but we have something that we can actually use to contribute to the world. So what is taught, these principles that are taught in Buddhism, we can actually kind of take them and from our tradition and use it to help the world. And so we have the opportunity and we have the facility with us. We're not talking only about Tibetans, nor just Asia, benefiting Asia, but the whole world. So if there is a possibility to help others, we should work. As I said, we don't need just to remain contented with prayer. May all sentient beings have happiness. So we should put effort, and after having put effort, if we are not able to be successful, we will not regret having done what we could. And so, of course, because thanks to our forebears, and then the wisdom from the Nalanda masters that we have received, we have a culture and which can actually serve the entire humanity. So, this is a general introduction, and now introduction to Buddhism. If Buddha were to come today, he would certainly talk about secular ethics, because in those days, because of different mental dispositions of his followers, the Buddha at some point of time said, as if there is, indicated as if there is some separate, independent soul or self. By saying the five psychophysical aggregates are the load or burden, and the person is the carrier of this burden. So I met one professor from Bihar, one university in Bihar, and then he became a monk. He took ordination from me. And then one day during our conversation, I talked about selflessness. And as I said, there's no self. His whole body shook. So he felt completely shocked to hear that there's no self. If there's no self, then nothing would exist. There would be nothing at all, he said. Then I slowly explained to him, selflessness doesn't mean that there's no conventional self as such. So I talked about the dependent nature and the selflessness are like the two sides of the coin. When we talk about selflessness, what we are rejecting is some kind of independent soul, and that when we actually reject that, we are actually doing that in relation to the person also. Even the Sangika Madhyamakas are said to be nihilists by other Buddhist philosophical schools. And so Buddha taught all these different, differing kind of philosophical ideas and concepts. So if the Buddha were to come today, he will definitely talk about secular ethics. So of course, theistic religions are very good to help others, to serve human beings, but they do not have this kind of deep and vast knowledge about mind. So they only base themselves on faith alone, without using much logic and reasoning. But by saying this, I'm not being disrespectful to the theistic religious traditions, because they are helpful to so many people, have been so for a long time. Therefore, I sincerely respect all the religious traditions. So some of them even say that God is full of love, infinite love. And sometimes these Christian practitioners say that when they see people on this earth, the creature of God himself, actually harm each other, kill each other, then God weeps. And an Indian friend of mine, who is really devoted to his religion, is very religious, he told me once that the entire universe and the world is created by God. But amongst his creature, human beings, there are human beings who are really evil. Why God created them? So there's not much answer I could give, but I half-jokingly said to him, I told him, God created both heaven and hell. And so since he already created hell, there must be someone to go there. And therefore, otherwise it's useless. There's no reason, no meaning for creating the hell. And so I said this, and he didn't have any, he didn't say anything to me. In Buddhist texts on logic and epistemology, as well as Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, there is arguments against Creator, God. I never say that Buddhism is the best religion, because whether something is good or bad, best or not, is actually relative. You have to talk in relation to somebody. If Buddhism is not appropriate, suitable to someone, it cannot be the best religion for that person. But philosophically speaking, I always say that Buddhism has the richest philosophical ideas. So I'm not putting down other religious traditions, because according to people's mental dispositions, we have differences of which philosophical views we can take or not. We make prayer for all sentient beings, happiness of all sentient beings. But in practical terms, even on this earth itself, we cannot do much for all the animals on this earth. As I said earlier, in answer to one question, somebody raised a question about killing. So if we could actually spread love and compassion among human beings, the killing of animals and others would reduce. So in our academic curriculum, if we could introduce love and compassion, education, love and compassion, we could reduce the number of beef farm or poultry and so forth. So man-made problems and difficulties, if we could actually make some change within human mind, then these problems could also be solved. So, of course, the problems cannot be solved if we deal with each and every one of them. But we should look from a wider perspective also to see how we could educate people in love and compassion. We should never feel demoralized, but we should always look at the solutions. So education has really increased in the whole world. And therefore, illiteracy has reduced immensely, even in India since its independence. Illiteracy has reduced. And so this is also the case in China as well. And so this has happened because of people's effort and not through prayer. And therefore, if we could actually increase the education on compassion and knowledge and experience on compassion and love, we could help humanity. So we have a tradition of teaching of Buddhism, which could actually be verified, that the truth of teachings could be verified through reason and logic, and we could actually spread it to others. It would be really beneficial to the world. So we have an opportunity to serve and make contribution to the world from this Buddhist culture, and particularly the Nalanda tradition that we have. Within Buddhism, we have the Pali and the Sanskrit traditions, and both have the same practice of Vinaya, the monastic discipline. I've met Burmese monks, as well as Thai monks and Sri Lankan monks from the Theravada tradition. They're really admirable. They're very good monks. And then, so with regard to Vinaya, this is something that we share with them. And then also it is the case with the Abhidharma. And then the practice of shamatha and vipassana also are something shared with these Theravada tradition, such as the Four Noble Truths, meditation, Four Noble Truths, and the 16 aspects or attributes. And then the 37 factors of enlightenment are all common. maybe there's difference in going into details, when you go into details and precision, and also and then within the Abhidharma, we could take the Paramita Sutras as higher Abhidharma, and then the other Abhidharma in the Theravada tradition, maybe like the Abhidharma Kosha as the lower Abhidharma. So we recite the Heart Sutra, which says that all the 5 aggregates are also empty of inherent nature. Empty of inherent nature. And then when we go into more detail about it, this Heart Sutra says form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness also is not other than form. So this is a fourfold emptiness. When we talk about emptiness, it is not some kind of a separate entity that we actually talk about, which has no connection with the objects about which we say they are empty of. Because form is empty, therefore form is dependent on other factors, and therefore emptiness is form. Emptiness doesn't mean nihilism, that there's nothing at all. So because of the basic nature of being empty of inherent nature, therefore dependence is feasible, and because of that, there's the causality is feasible. So form and its emptiness actually are of one entity or one nature, and therefore it is said form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form too is not other than emptiness. So form is empty, says mentions the ultimate nature of form, and when it said emptiness is form, it's actually saying talking about the conventionality of form itself. So my late brother, Dr. Rinpoche, told me a story about 2 Amdo persons. One of them was able to recite by heart, recite from heart, by heart the Heart Sutra, and the other one did not. And so the one who didn't know the Heart Sutra by heart listened to the other one reciting the Heart Sutra loudly, where it says there's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, and so forth. And then the other one who kept listening said, you didn't need to say no eye, no ear, no nose, all these things, but you could have just said no head, simply. So he found it too complicated to say. So the Heart Sutra says there's no form, no sound, and so forth, which means that they don't exist apart from being dependent. And also it goes through the different sensory faculties, and also the path, progression along the path. Having said that there's no this, no that, does the Heart Sutras actually reject the existence of everything? No, because later it says all the Buddhas of the 3 times have actually become enlightened by relying on this perfection of wisdom. And therefore, there is a progression along the path referred by the Gati, Paragati, Parasamgati, Bodhiswaha. And so, once you develop genuine bodhicitta within yourself, you reach the bodhisattva path of accumulation. And then, so for someone of sharp faculty, they first realize emptiness, and with the help of this understanding and insight of the emptiness, they are able to cultivate compassion, and on the basis of that, they generate bodhicitta. And then, because once they have the practitioner has this genuine bodhicitta within themselves, they become a bodhisattva, reaching the path of accumulation. And so Nagarjuna has said karma and delusions, when they cease, there's liberation. And these karma and delusions come from some kind of fantasized thinking and inappropriate thinking. And these inappropriate thinking exaggerations also are rooted in our reification of things. And this reification is actually seized or ended by emptiness. Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck. So, this American psychiatrist, I think he's also called the father of cognitive therapy. So he's now around 97. I met him last year. So when he was about 84 or so, I met him. So he has lots of experience treating people with psychiatric problems. So he told me that when, of course, because we feel disturbed, we become agitated, and then we show anger. So he said that when someone is angry with somebody, the other person looks absolutely negative, but the 90% of that negativeness is actually our own mental projection. And so this is exactly what is referred or said by Nagarjuna in the verse that I quoted. So the negative emotions like anger and so forth arise because of our inappropriate thinking. And this in turn comes about or arises within us because we actually look at things as if there is some absolute existence in them. And so when we are able to actually destroy all objectification of things, they will not. The power or the intensity of our grasping at some absolute existence in things will reduce. And because of that, the inappropriate exaggerations also can reduce, and that in turn helps to reduce our negative emotions like anger, attachment, and so forth. And so I don't claim to have real realization of emptiness as such, but I have some kind of experience which may be called, which we call an experience that comes about through when I put some effort in this to have the insight. So bodhicitta and the view of emptiness are the real weapons that can fight our extreme self-centeredness, cherishing oneself alone, and also the grasping at some absolute existence in things. Therefore, these two, bodhicitta and the view of emptiness, are very precious. So if you have some interest in religion, and particularly Buddhist practice, you should actually give thought to these two, contemplate, reflect on them, And also, you could realize, use the Heart Sutra to meditate on happiness. And then as time passes, when 10 years or 20 years pass, then you can see some change actually happening in your mind. And so when you make bodhicitta as your foundation practice, the heart practice, then you actually are a follower of the Mahayana. Whereas if you focus on your enlightenment alone, you actually fall under the category of practitioners of the Shravakas and Prajagabuddhas. And so when you have the experience of bodhicitta, genuine, true, authentic experience of bodhicitta, you become a bodhisattva by reaching the path of accumulation, and then you go on from there to the path of preparation, which actually comes about through gaining this insight in the combination of it called experience of emptiness, shamatha and vipassana, based on in relation to emptiness. And then you go on from there, progress to a path of seeing, where you see emptiness directly, and then from there starts the first level of or ground of bodhisattvas. And so this is referred by the Paragati, and then the next is the path of meditation, which from the second bodhisattva ground onwards up to the 10th bodhisattva ground, you are on the path of meditation, referred by Parasamgati in the mantra. And then Bodhiswaha refers to total enlightenment, the Buddhahood within the context of Mahayana. And Swaha refers to laying the foundation. So the Tibetan word for enlightenment or bodhi is changchup. Chang has the connotation of purifying negativities or defilements from within our mind. And once you actually are able to eliminate all the defilements, these impediments in your mind, then the basic quality of the mind itself is such that it can actually see, cognize things. And because you have removed all the veils, then you're able to see everything as they are. And so, by reducing our grasping in some true absolute existence in things, gradually we will be able to completely eradicate it from our mind. And then you are left with the residual stains of the negative emotions, which can be overcome, which are called the cognitive obscurations. And then when you even get rid of those impediments from your mind, you actually reach the state of omniscience, Buddhahood. And so, in order to become a Buddha, to reach that kind of enlightenment, full enlightenment of Buddhahood, you need to actually cultivate both merit and wisdom. And so, the merit is accumulated with the help of bodhicitta, which in turn complements the insight into emptiness. Together, they help you to accumulate merit and wisdom, and then complete your path, which culminates in Buddhahood, which is free from both the obscurations or impediments. I need to go. So Holiness is talking about becoming unhappy when you are actually, even in dream. Do they ever try it? Try it, do it. subject. His Holiness was sorry. He's talking about the degrees of subtlety within the mind itself. For example, the waking state mind are coarser than the mind at the sleep state, and that in turn, when you dream, it's subtler. And so when you dream, and then when you are in the deep sleep, the mind goes still subtler. And so by using the subtler levels, layers of mind, is what Tantra is about. And so the highest Yoga Tantra is the main system where all the subtle, different degrees of subtlety of mind are actually explained and described. And as preliminary to the highest Yoga Tantra, we have the first three Tantras. And so in Tibetan Buddhism has the entire range of the teaching of the Buddha, including what is taught in the Hinayana, or the basic vehicle, as well as the Sutrayana and the Mahayana and Tantra. And so we have the Theravada tradition, with whom we share the about Vinaya, and also concentration, single-pointed concentration, and Vipassana, as well as we can also have opportunity to share about bodhicitta, and when we meet and discuss with practitioners of Buddhism from China or Japan, and also we can talk about Tantra. So in Japan and China, the Mahayana practitioners who actually recite the Heart Sutra as well. I mean, the practitioners from Japan or China, if they meet with some Sri Lankan monks, then maybe they won't have something common to discuss. But we can have discussions with people from the Pali tradition, as well as the Mahayana tradition, who recite the Heart Sutra, as well as those who practice Tantra. And therefore, the teaching of Buddha that we have in Tibet is a complete teaching of the Buddha. Chandarakshita was a monk, a great monk, as well as logician. So philosophically, he was a follower of Madhyamaka and also a great scholar of logic. And therefore, the term, the crossed necks of two lions actually was coined for someone who follows a Madhyamaka tradition while using logic. So if we could actually use logic to demonstrate and explain the Madhyamaka philosophy, then that is where this term actually is used. It's not just saying some kind of majestic looking, like a lion is said to be the king of animals. But when lions sometimes get old, then hyenas can actually attack it from behind. But if two lions actually stand crossing their necks with each other, so they look in different directions, then this is going to be actually they are going to protect themselves from any enemy, and they don't have to fear anyone. So this is what is meant by the yoked necks of two lions. And so in our study of Buddhism, of course, we use logic. Of course, there are cases where you resort to scriptural citation as well. So even for non-believers, we have something to actually talk to them that is going to be beneficial to them. And also for people who follow religious traditions, we have something to share with them, which is going to be beneficial to all. And so this is our treasure that we have, and we should really be take interest and pay attention to it. The fifth Dalai Lama has said that the knowledge of Dharma that he had actually came through his effort. And so it's important for us to put effort and work hard to learn the Dharma. And then the compendium or the compilation of the signs from the Buddhist scriptures that we have brought out, the 2-volume, and then a shorter version of one book. Some Tibetans have, especially from inside Tibet, have said that these are very good books. But some have said that it's very difficult to read and comprehend. In Nagpur, in South India, I visited a Buddhist community, an Indian Buddhist community, and there they requested me to actually give a teaching on something which is easy, which was going to be easy for them to understand. And I responded by saying, if people knew everything, what's the need for me to talk? They need information about something that they don't know. So if we just say, oh, this is too difficult to understand, and leave the book aside, of course, then you won't learn anything. So if you want to gain knowledge, you need to learn, study. And so if you know everything, you don't need to study. So I felt rather annoyed when the person said, please talk about something very simple. So because we need to make people understand what they don't know.